Welcome to Believe in Celtics. I'm your host, Warren Shaw. Not alongside me just yet is great Gary Washburn from the Boston Globe, but we're your host and resources for everything Boston Celtics this season and all seasons. But in the meantime, between time, I have an amazing special guest here to talk Indiana Pacers basketball with the Boston Celtics here in this Eastern Conference Finals matchup. The great Caitlin Cooper, who has recently started her own platform, Basketball She Wrote. You can make sure you follow her at CT_Cooper. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us, family. How you been?
Hey, thanks for having me on. Excited to be talking about the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals, even though they find themselves currently in an 0-2 hole with Tyrese Haliburton's status somewhat up in the air.
Up in the air indeed. Caitlin, listen, this is the unexpected opponent, I think, for Boston's standpoint. Carlisle said as much, after that lengthy 7-game series against the New York Knicks, the uninvited guest. Talk to us a little bit about your coverage of the team this year and this run to at least get them to this part of the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, it's interesting with the way that both teams have been covered to an extent, because I feel like the Celtics aren't always given a lot of grace, and that, forgive me for forgiving the Celtics that they've advanced to the Eastern Conference Finals. And it seems like sometimes they get blamed for not winning by enough points. And for the Pacers, it feels like all of their wins are typically discredited throughout this run because they have face teams with injuries, and I think that's certainly part of it. There's no denying that helped them in the second round of the playoffs, that OG Anunoby wasn't available, that Jalen Brunson was clearly limited at times with the injured foot, but I also do think that they made adjustments throughout that series that they deserved credit for, particularly on the defensive end. And then when they got to game 6 and 7, coincidentally, or rather ironically now, Tyrese Haliburton finally started looking like Tyrese again, the guy that was playing in the in-season tournament and really was having a lot more trust in his shot, particularly powering off that left leg to get to his right. And then obviously in game 2, we see him come up and have a little bit of a hamstring issue again. We'll see what the extent of it is for game 3, but just seeing that Siakam was finally playing with the version of who Tyrese Haliburton is capable of being, I felt was going to give them a little bit of momentum coming into the series. And obviously a lot went right for them in game 1. 98% of game 1 went correct for them. And then about 2% went really, really haywire. But I think that's where they find themselves headed into the rest of the series.
Caitlin, obviously you cover this team, for a while. And I've been trying to figure out, was it just kind of a media narrative, so to speak? Haliburton taking that step back after that initial injury, some months ago now. Like, was that really it? Or did the league kind of catch up to him? Was it a kind of a combination of all those things? Or, I mean, was he just really fighting to get back to injury, fight through that injury, played the 65 games, qualify, for the bonus that he ultimately ends up getting by making All-NBA? Just talk to us a little bit about that from your lens, covering and being as close to them as you have been.
I think it was a little bit like a hurricane followed by a tsunami. So he has that injury in the middle of January. Pascal Siakam and he are kind of like ships passing in the night. Literally, Tyrese comes back to play in the first game with Siakam. Probably comes back a little too soon, like you mentioned, like wanting to press in order to get to the All-NBA contract incentive. He was cleared to play. I think that he might have taken more time if that game requirement wasn't there. Then he ends up missing a number of games after that, coming back. And the thing that I noticed most is like what I said, he's a right-handed shooter, but he prefers to step back to his right. And what I started noticing when he returned is that there was a lot more of those threes where he was stepping back to his left, which isn't his normal movement pattern. And some of that is what you said, like defenses do. You can see through the first round of 2 rounds of the playoffs, most defenses are going to shade him to his left. So it was some of that, but also it was a little bit of avoidance that he didn't want to be powering off that left leg to get to his right. There was other things even early on in the Knicks series where you could tell that he still wasn't 100% with the back spasms being there as well. Like I mentioned that there was times where they had him in drop coverage where like, I don't think he was intentionally in drop coverage. I just don't think he had the mobility and flexibility in his back to be stepping up above the level of the screen. So that was there. But I think another component of it that went somewhat underrated is that they traded Buddy Hield. And Buddy Hield, if you're somebody who's struggling to get separation because of what the injury was, one of the top actions that they used with Tyrese was Buddy setting a go screen for Tyrese against switches to kind of help him get a little bit, be able to spin his tires past that switch. Once Buddy was no longer there, Tyrese became the best movement shooter in the starting lineup. Rick Carlisle runs a lot of actions that involve movement shooters. So then some of Tyrese's threes that he would normally get weren't all coming like out of pull-ups against drop coverage or easier catch and shoots. They were more movement threes where he was coming out as a stack screener or he was running off of floppy screens. So like I said, I think he was injured. Then a teammate that allowed him to be running different types of sets was no longer there, and it was just an adjustment period for him. In addition to, they made a massive trade to be getting Pascal Siakam, and he was adapting to that as well. So I think that it was a combination of things to answer your question, but I think that all is what led them to where they were at yet. And now it started looking like he was becoming healthier. And unfortunately, what happens in game 3 happens.
Yeah. And that's such an interesting thing for me from the aspect of, I was like, all right, well, without the proper rest, how did he really get healthier? Because again, he was looking like a one-legged guy, kind of in the beginning part of the Knicks series. And then I don't know if it's really just true, that athletes, to get that adrenaline playing in the home crowd. Then obviously at game 7, the excitement that's at, like, he looked rejuvenated all of a sudden, like a switch had been flipped. So that's always like kind of bonkers to me. It's like, hey, we're seeing the same thing in the Western Conference. Luka, same thing, like dragging that leg around, and then all of a sudden he looks like himself again, and nothing has really changed. In terms of the rest, like what happens in a situation like that where they can look so bad at one point, they're clearly still hampered by an injury, but then all of a sudden, they're back to their old self, so to speak.
I think some of it for Tyrese was quite honestly more the back spasm issue, because that's what he was being listed as questionable with. And I think sometimes with that, at least just my own individual experience with that with family members, is that can come and go pretty quickly. Gotcha. Like you can be dealing with it and then not be. So I think that was kind of, again, another layer on top of the other thing he was already dealing with. And once that he wasn't as stiff and upright as a 45-degree when he was in defense towards the back end of that season. And that was kind of something you could tell.
So let's transition ourselves back into the series here now. Thank you so much for that insight. In terms of Tyrese now, again, we get the news that he's questionable for game 3. Celtics have Luke Kornet listed as doubtful, I believe, and Porzingis is obviously still out. Not much has been made about the fact that the Pacers don't have, Mathurin and won't have him, if you will. I mean, so another guy who they need in their lineup and is a very, very good basketball player, so to speak. But in this game 3 now, what are some adjustment strategies that you expect from Carlisle if they have Hallie or if they don't? So kind of a 2-part question in that. Like, what will you see if they do, and what would you see if they don't in terms of rotations and things like that?
Either way, this is kind of the first time for the Pacers in the playoffs that they're playing a team that can feasibly switch across all 5 positions. And that's what they ended up doing. Like, not that you're ever better when you don't have Kristaps Porzingis or Luke Kornet having that wrist injury, but by going small and playing the lineups with O'Shea Brissett and Sam Hauser, the Pacers solidly lost those minutes. I think they got outscored by 15 points per 100 in the 18 minutes when Boston wasn't playing Al Horford or Luke Kornet. So the more you can switch against the Pacers, that is the best coverage to limit Tyrese for kind of some of the reasons I explained earlier. He can tend to rely on his step back 3, and if it's a game where those shots aren't falling, he doesn't drive a lot of switches. You can tell even with the bench unit that the Pacers weren't getting the same driving angles and penetration into the paint when the Celtics started switching everything with those groups. And I felt like on both ends of the floor, I felt like they overreacted to that lineup adjustment on defense in terms of, I like a lot of things about O'Shea. I watched him play for the Pacers for a couple seasons. I think that if you were going to stay big in those minutes, they needed to be sagging off of O'Shea a lot more, because the Pacers got absolutely clobbered in points in the paint in this game, 54-34. And they were spread out with a spread lineup. And it's like, I think they overreacted defensively a little bit to what that adjustment was. And then I felt that they also underreacted to it offensively, especially with Miles Turner. They're going to need a lot more from Miles in this game, whether Tyrese does play, or doesn't play, and especially if he doesn't play, because I'm not expecting a lot of him against that cross match. Obviously, they put Al Horford onto Pascal Siakam at the second half of game 1 from the start of game 2. I'm not expecting Miles to be them running a lot of offense through him against Jason Tatum and against Jaylen Brown. I don't think that would be a huge advantage matchup for them. However, if he's getting a switch against Derek White, it can't be a fadeaway shot versus Derek White, or a fadeaway shot from O'Shea Brissett in the paint, or if one of his teammates shoots a 3 and he has that mismatch against Derek White, that needs to be an offensive rebounding opportunity for the Pacers. So I feel like I worded it today that in a lot of the possessions, I felt like they were playing tall against the Celtics small ball lineup when they needed to be playing big. They had tall players out there, but they weren't often leveraging that mismatch in terms of their favor. So I think that, looking for those interior mismatches is going to be big for them regardless of whether Tyrese plays or he doesn't.
Do you think in some ways, because Turner is a guy the Celtics have flirted with, in years past, and, has shows some interest or whatever, but he can it's not the right comp, but I think he can be a little Brook Lopez-y, I guess, if you will, in terms of like, guess it gives you the rim protection, not always the rebounding and the offensive rebounding. I think, in that regard, is that something in essence that, not that like you're saying, hey, that's something that he could and potentially should do, but is it just innate? Like some guys are just not, hey, I'm a 6-7 rebound type guy. I'm not a 12-15 rebound type guy. What are you seeing from Turner that would give you that level of confidence that he could do those things to maybe turn this series around a little bit?
Yeah, on the rebounding front, the Pacers, since they acquired Pascal, they were dead last in opponent offensive rebounding rate prior to the Siakam trade, and then they moved up to like 24th. So they're still not a good rebounding team in terms of finishing possessions. There have been games in the playoffs where they've been better at getting second chances. Miles is capable of doing that. And that's the thing, too, is that I really do think that he's made strides over the last year and a half over what he can do against the right types of switches. I've seen in games like when they've played the Clippers in the past, and the Clippers are a switch-heavy team, that he and Tyrese have been able to go against that and feed the ball inside, and that's adjusted what teams have been willing to do. I've seen him do that likewise against the Pelicans in games when they've played Zion Williamson at the 5. So I think that it's something he can play better than what he played in game 2, and that's kind of why I had a little bit more of a standard for him. Like if I wasn't expecting him to do it, I probably wouldn't have pointed it out. I'm not expecting it as much when he's being guarded by the wings as much as I am when some of the switches against guards came. Because if there was a palatable stretch of play from the Pacers in that game, it was probably the last 5 minutes. And coincidentally, Miles got into foul trouble and they closed out the half with Pascal and Obi Toppin out there in the front court. And Pascal was doing exactly that. Like he scored the last 10 points of the half for the Pacers. And a lot of them were him going to work, whether testing Jason Tatum in isolation, shooting over the top of Drew Holiday, shooting over the top of Jaylen Brown. It was just a contrast between the two of them in terms of how willing they were to be aggressive against those mismatches and recognize them.
We're talking with Caitlin Cooper. Make sure you follow her at CT_Cooper. Make sure you catch her musings and writings over at Basketball She Wrote. Caitlin, a few more here. So from the Celtics side of things, Drew Holiday has really stepped up, in this series specifically. A lot of people saying, well, this is what we got him for. Not that he was coasting, but he was really truly doing most of the intangible things and obviously playing good defense kind of throughout. We're seeing his total all-around game here in the first couple of games of this, especially offensively, shooting great percentages, assisting, 10 dimes in game 2. Is that something, in essence, Carlisle was prepared for? And in essence, because it's one thing like, hey, he can do that, but that's not what we've been seeing from him up to this point. Is that something, in essence, that, hey, was made not necessarily a surprise, but it's like, all right, well, now this is another problem we have to solve when it comes to these Celtics.
Yeah, full disclosure, I can let people know that Drew Holiday is one of my favorite non-Pacers in the entire NBA. I really enjoy him, especially as a defensive playmaker. And I think that's where most of my expectations were for him headed into the season, was the impact he'd be making on that end of the floor. From the Pacers perspective, I think you probably hit the nail on the head there, that when you look at what the matchups were to start the series, they're obviously putting Nesmith onto Jason Tatum and Pascal onto Jaylen Brown, which that's probably something I would tinker with if I were them. And Andrew Nembhard onto Derek White, because they don't want Tyrese Haliburton to be guarding at the point of attack as much as possible. So that means Tyrese is on Drew Holiday. Obviously, they have to put Tyrese onto someone. And then it's like anytime they plug one leak against the Celtics, another one starts to spring water. And that's just what happens when you have that many advantages on the floor, because I pointed it out in game 1 that when they were in the third quarter, or the fourth quarter, actually, they briefly put Pascal onto Jason Tatum, which I think makes more sense, as does putting Nesmith onto Brown. And then it just turned into, okay, Tatum, you're going to chill out for a little bit. And now Drew Holiday is just going to bully the mismatches that he finally has against the guards. Because there has been, when only one big is on the floor, they've been putting Pascal more onto Drew as well. But as soon as that matchup got switched, it was just Drew being able to do some bully ball things as he's capable of doing with his strength. So did I expect that he was going to be as efficient as he's been? No, not to this point. But my expectation from the Pacers is it's possible that if he's still doing some of this of what we've seen against Ben Shepherd and TJ McConnell, there are times against mismatches like that where the Pacers might start to double. They might bring somebody from the nearest closest passer and double from that spot. But if they're looking at what they're going to be willing to give up, and this is no disrespect to Drew Holiday, but they have to pick one spot, that's probably still what it's going to be.
Kaylin, Rick kind of indicated at the tail end of game 2 there, hey, I wanted to get some different looks, and so he's been maligned, I think, in the days past here, I guess just today, and say, hey, well, why would he give up so early, so forth and so forth, and playing some of those end of the bench guys, and trying to get a look at that. Are you buying that from your lens, or is it that you'll see, more of those guys getting an opportunity here, in game 3 in the series, especially if Haliburton, is going to miss time, or even the rest of the series? Is that where Rick will go now to try to counter, what Missoula has done, with some of that, and especially with holiday matchup and the things we talked about earlier with Horford switching on to Siakam, et cetera? Is that something that you think Rick Carlisle will do now here in essence? Is like, you know what, here's my counterpunch. Here's some guys that you didn't see come in, and see if they can give the Pacers some plus minutes.
I mean, I got to admit, it caught me off guard a little bit that it was obvious that Tyrese wasn't going to play in the fourth quarter, but the fact that Aaron Nesmith and Miles Turner never played in the fourth quarter when it was still within, I think they were down 13 or 14 points at one point in the fourth. Pascal came out and didn't return. He said that he thought that Pascal looked worn out, which, I can understand that. This is a tight turnaround. There's only one day off. And at a certain point, if you don't think that Tyrese is going to be able to come back, I get it. But at the same time, like when they started the quarter and Doug McDermott was out there, that was very surprising to me. And because I don't really think, I don't know exactly what spot Doug McDermott would have in this series, especially with the amount of mismatch hunting that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum were doing in game 2, particularly from Jaylen Brown's perspective. And about the only spot that you could find that in is that the Celtics have played more zone when TJ McConnell's been on the floor. They've gone to that 2-1-2. Maybe in that case, you might throw Doug out there, see if he can make a quick shot or two. They did that in the round against the Bucks, where Doug virtually came in as like a special substitution. He'd make a 3. Maybe the Bucks come out of the zone and he immediately comes right back out. So that's about the only way that I can see that Doug McDermott's cracking this rotation. Other than that, it's possible they might look at Jalen Smith, just because Isaiah kind of struggled in that game, and that's a spot that they kind of toggle back and forth between. But even then, if Boston's going to continue to play small until Porzingis comes back, and those bench lineups with O'Shea and with Tatum playing at the 5, I think it's more likely that they'll continue to play Siakam and Obi Toppin and those groupings, with those being the backup bigs. So I can't say that I expect any of those guys to crack into the rotation, but obviously Rick Carlisle's a lot smarter than me, so he might have seen something during those minutes where he was like, hey, that's something that perhaps we could take advantage of, in addition to just resting guys' legs and getting ready and kind of looking ahead to game 3. But I will admit that it did puzzle me when they went to that as soon as they did in the fourth quarter, especially with Doug.
I mean, and that's fair, right? And so I do want to get your opinion here, because again, you're very well respected in the NBA space, and as well you should be. And so I'm sure you followed and saw some of the discourse, if you will, on Joe Mazzulla as a coach, especially tail end of last year. As an opponent, if you will, watching the Celtics being different. And yes, the personnel is vastly different, because Porzingis and Holiday open up things for you that, not a lot of coaches have, that luxury per se. But have you noticed a difference in Mazzulla's adjustments, willingness to adjust? What are you hearing from around the league as it relates to Mazzulla, especially, with a team that is supposed to be competing for an NBA championship?
I think sometimes he gets overly criticized, and I think that it's kind of like with defenders in the NBA, right? Once you have a reputation as a good defender, you're always a good defender, even if you start to show some slippage on that end of the floor. And the reverse, if you're a bad defender, you're always a bad defender, even if you've made some strides. That was like the case with Buddy Hield this year. He actually improved in certain areas defensively, but everyone just assumed like he's always been a target. That's what he's going to be. I think that can be the case with coaches sometimes too. Like once kind of the mass opinion is that guy's a good coach, it's kind of like, I mean, that happened in the Celtics series against the Heat, right? Where Eric Spoelstra was really lauded when the Heat got that win. And it's like, okay, like I think Eric Spoelstra is a good coach, don't get me wrong, but it's like the massive adjustment was like take and make a bunch of threes. Like that's kind of what it was. And Joe Mazzulla's case, like watching the Celtics this year, they've been one of my favorite watches, especially on the defensive end of the floor. And certainly he has the personnel to try a lot of stuff and just see if it sticks, but also he's been willing to try a lot of stuff and see if it sticks. Like the first time I saw them play that 2-1-2 zone with Drew in the middle of it, and they're playing man and zone within the same possessions, there's not a lot of teams that would even be willing to try that. And then to see him have that conversation with Drew Holiday and be telling him, like, you're going to be our quarterback out there, and really be empowering him to make those decisions and call those audibles within it. And then even in this series, like, even looking at a tiny thing like the Luke Cornett minutes in the first half of game 1 did not go well. Like Miles Turner was scoring really easily against Cornett and drop. In this game, he was trying to pair Cornett initially with that 2-1-2 zone to try to shield some of that. And then they made the adjustment. Another thing that he's been willing to try in a lot of games this year of putting a center onto a point guard. So they assigned Cornette to TJ McConnell, which is something they had done during the regular season too. And I would also give him credit and say that I know that the tendency also is to look at the Pacers and look at all the different ways that they melted down at the end of game one, which is fair. They made a lot of mistakes that are difficult to explain. But also Joe Mazzulla called that play for Jaylen Brown to make that three. And Jaylen Brown obviously made an incredible shot, and that's a highlight that people are going to look back and see in his career. But making those calls and making clutch shots is not easy. Just look at what the Pacers did a few seconds later. Like, their play was Tyrese Haliburton going against a switch versus Jason Tatum and almost, an off-balance three. And that's not necessarily a knock against the Pacers. It's just to point out that that's really hard. So I feel like sometimes, in my opinion, and maybe Celtics fans would tell me differently because obviously they've been watching the adjustments throughout the entirety of the playoffs and the season. I think that it became easy to be overly critical of Joe Mazzulla in his first year, especially following up what Ime Udoka had done, taking the team to the finals. And that has lingered, even though I do think that he's made some progress. And I've seen some things even in the series where it's like, yeah, that was a good thing that the Celtics did there. Is that fair? Or would you kind of lean the other way?
No, I mean, I think everything is fair, in that regard. And I'm just like, when you watch this team and you watch what Mazzulla has been through, I think, as an individual, and Gary, who I do the show with regularly, even the post-game pressers and the conversations and just kind of like the challenges there, a lot of what Mazzulla gets is because I think of his overall demeanor. And so then as a result, I think, again, it's the reputation I think that you pointed out to is like, all right, well, has he really improved? But I've been saying this for a while too. I think having Cassell and Charles Lee, as well too, and some others on the sidelines that also helped. And just second year doing the job, and even in my full-time job, I'm better at it now than I was 3 years ago. Like you just learn. And I think that's, with Boston, there's a lot of expectations just in general. And if you have to hit a home run right away, and that's just not realistic. Everybody has a chance to kind of learn the job, learn the personnel, and make some mistakes through that. But because the stakes are so high, I don't always know that he got the praise when he should have got it. He definitely got the criticism when he should have, but I don't know that it's turned around in the other way for this, because I think those are great points in terms of some of the adjustments he's made this year, this playoffs as well too. And not everybody's giving him like that, and he's going up against legendary guys, Carlisle and Spoelstra, like those are legendary dudes. So, I think it's always going to be like, all right, well, is he doing enough? But as we alluded to, Indiana just kind of, with Hallie being hurt, the Pacers are just not, I think right now, equipped physically in essence to match up, but that's not a coaching thing one way or the other. But I really do appreciate that insight here. That is a great Caitlin Cooper. I'm calling, oh my God, I'm so apologies. Caitlin Cooper. Make sure you follow her at CT_Cooper. Make sure you follow her writings over at Basketball She Wrote. We'll be right back here on the other side of this break here at Believe in Celtics. Thanks.
Are you ready to step up your style without compromising the planet? Introducing the exciting partnership between Blueview Footwear and the 19 Media Group Network. Just visit bit.ly/Blueview19 to start your sustainable style journey. Our friends over at Blueview Footwear are renowned for introducing the world's first fully biodegradable sneaker. By using plant-based plastics, they are leading a revolution in cleaner materials and manufacturing. They have sleek and contemporary styles that cater to a wide range of tastes. Blueview Footwear believes that fashion and sustainability can coexist harmoniously. Explore their incredible collection of eco-friendly footwear by visiting bit.ly/Blueview19. If you let us know you made a purchase, we'll shout you out on our next show. Again, just visit bit.ly/Blueview19 today, and you'll see the ultimate collaboration of fashion, sustainability, and media excellence.
And we're back here on Believe in Celtics, and alongside me now for the second half of the show is the great Gary Washburn. As always, you know what to do. Follow him at G Washburn Globe, and you can always follow me at Shaw Sports NBA as well too. Gary, your thoughts as we tag you in here. We just spoke with Caitlin Cooper. A lot of great insight from her on the Pacers, the backstory of the Pacers getting there, some adjustments that can happen throughout the rest of this series potentially. Haliburton, for some reason, is listed as questionable and not out just yet. So I don't know if that's a little, gamesmanship from the Pacers standpoint there. But your thoughts on the series thus far from Boston's standpoint and how they should probably take things home here.
Yeah, I think that they played okay in game one. They had chances to extend the lead. I thought that so there were some tactical errors made. I thought taking out Tatum with 2:38 left in the third, they're up 11, and inserting him with Sam Hauser was a mistake. I thought if you leave Tatum in For the rest of that quarter, you probably extend the lead, maybe from 11 to 15, 17, something like that, and have full control of the game. Instead, those Tatum minutes were disastrous. He was the Celtics were a minus 15 with him off the floor. And then once they made that 12-2 run to end the quarter, it was a ball game, and obviously Indiana was able to kind of play better in the fourth, and then obviously it took the heroics of Jalen and then overtime. So I thought the Celtics played a B minus C plus game in game one. I didn't think that it was a clunker. I didn't think it was a great performance. And I thought they learned some things about the Cornette minutes, about the Hauser minutes, about maybe when to insert Pritchard, maybe the need for more athleticism. And they got, quite honestly, lucky, but they took advantage of that opportunity. They played the game all the way through. They didn't give up. They didn't put their heads down on that inbounds pass. Jalen contested, and Nembhard made kind of a crazy kind of pass, and Siakam ran toward the baseline for whatever reason, away from the action, and then obviously the three-pointer where he didn't want to foul Jalen, and then overtime, even that terrible pass by Jason, and then the Haliburton getting fouled on the three-point shot. You thought to yourself, okay, I think it's finally caught up with him. Indiana's probably going to lock this down, and then suddenly Jason arises and scores 6 in a row, and then that essentially sealed the game. I thought game two, they made some necessary adjustments. Indiana came out hot. The Celtics didn't get punched and not punched back. They just hung in there, like a boxer. They just kind of held on for a minute. When the flurry came on, they don't get knocked down. Just, wait, let things settle down. Indiana settled down at 20-0 run. And then I thought Jaylen Brown was obviously tremendous. I thought Tatum was a little strangely passive in the first half, but then scored 19 in the second. And then a good game from Derek White, Drew Holiday. I thought the Hauser minutes were not as terrible as they were in game one. I think Brissett brings, and I'm not sure, and, I wish I knew, Warren, why doesn't he play more? What's wrong? They signed that guy to kind of take Grant Williams' spot. And I'm not sure, besides his inability to shoot, I think they thought they were going to get a better shooter. And I'm not talking about, 39% from three. I think they thought they would get someone who was maybe 33, 34, a decent shooter, someone who could, have his moments from the perimeter. And it hasn't been the case. And I don't know how much that's affected his playing time, but he's completely fallen out of the rotation. But he's 26. He's an athlete. He's playing against his former team. He can rebound, defend, run the floor, get steals, and he can score here and there at the rim. Obviously his perimeter shooting is lacking, but they didn't need that. And so I thought that lineup, Warren, with Tatum at the 5, Brissett at the 4, was really, really effective. And you need athletes against Indiana. They got a bunch of them. They got the Neesmiths off the bench, and they got, the kid from Belmont coming off the bench. They got quality players. It's a quality team over there. So I thought the Celtics made some necessary game two adjustments, avoided their implosion that's been the last couple of game twos, and were able to kind of grab control of this series. And Indiana was kind of due for just not a great game. I mean, I think they played a high-level game 7. They played a high-level game 6. They played a very good game 1 besides the turnovers. So you just saw, okay, Indiana – there's a reason why, Warren, they won. They were 47-35. The reason why they were a 6 seed. You can play as over your head as you want, but when you're a 6 seed, generally sometimes you're going to play like it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, I think, the percent minutes in terms of as it relates to Cornette. So I think, is that because we were talking with Caitlin a little bit earlier, and, she thought that was a great adjustment by Joe, but was that almost a forced adjustment? Do you feel like that was something that they were going to go to regardless?
I think it was maybe a forced adjustment because of the injury, but I just think they understand that, one, Cornette cannot guard Miles Turner. It's a bad matchup.
For sure. Yeah.
2, I don't think they probably realized how much they would miss Porzingis in this series until they had all these Siakam and Nembhard matchups against Al on the pick and roll, where they were like, okay, we don't have a rim protector, and Al's getting hooked, as they say, on the pick and rolls with the mid-range jumpers. So with Cornette, you're looking for energy. but there was some plays. Tatum threw a really good pass at the rim, and Cornette just literally botched it. I think Cornette then picked up a foul in the next. This is game one, so his minutes were really an adventure. So I think going deeper into the bench was a necessity, but it was also because of the injury. But it was also something I think they would have tried anyway, and I think they probably would have given Xavier Tillman a look too. I don't know, and when we don't get to watch practice, we don't see. Oh wow, that guy looks terrible in practice. First of all, you can't really when you look at an NBA practice, you unless you look at it for 20, 30 minutes, you're not going to see a guy doing terribly or a guy doing great. We get free throw shooting, right? We get guys working on, their dribbling. We do not get scrimmages. So it's hard for me to determine why Xavier Tillman hasn't played much in the playoffs either. When they got him, and in Memphis, he had a definitive role. But maybe now you can use him for a little bit of beef in the paint. Maybe as resistance to Siakam. I thought that they were playing Horford too many minutes, and I think he took 12 threes in game one. That's far. You want him taking 6. You don't want him taking 12. Like, that's what teams want. I think as we saw in the Cleveland series, they know that the weak link, and Al's not a weak link, but he's the weakest in the lineup, is Al Horford. Because he's 37, because he might be a little step slow, and because he's a streaky shooter, not a great shooter, hey, let him take threes. If he hits those threes, you'd rather have him take it than Holiday. You'd rather have him take it than White. And even though Tatum has been struggling from 3, you don't want Jason Tatum just getting clean looks, and then you'd rather take it than Jalen. So I thought that it was a tactical move in terms of getting Brissett involved, but I also think they got to figure out what to do with the big man position. Cornette is listed as doubtful for game 3. So they're going to have to figure out what to do in that front line if he can't play. I didn't see the wrist injury. I didn't see exactly what happened there. I kind of was, curious about that. Just like, I didn't see the Haliburton thing. Our view, sometimes we don't, TV folks get it better. They see the guys run off the bench. And I also want to say this about the TV broadcast. Like, there's been talk about the crowd. The crowd's been great. ESPN puts kind of a mute thing. TNT does it. So the TNT broadcast and ESPN broadcasts are different. ESPN lets you hear Mike Breen. They let you hear the officials. You can't hear the music. You can't hear the crowd. So it looks like you're at an opera, right? As opposed to an NBA playoff game. So I heard some people, the Celtic crowd needs to step up. They were fired up for game 1, and then not as much for game 2 until the end. But they were definitely into game 1. So obviously you'd rather be up 2-0 than down 2-0. They still got a lot of work to do because Indiana's a tough team at home. But I think they can make the necessary adjustments to at least get 1 here in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I guess that leads us into this, right? So this should be a Celtics, not say March, if you will, but they should be punching their ticket to the finals here at some point. I do think the Indiana Pacers, whether Hallie plays or not, and there'll be the discourse out there, especially if he doesn't, and Indiana gets one. And I think it's, there's a lot to be said about that Indiana crowd. That's going to be excitable, and those young guys and those rotation players will ultimately play better at home. As Shaq kind of always says as well too. So I think we got to prepare ourselves for that. Ultimately. But is there something in these games, and these aren't practice games, right? Like, they haven't won the series, but is there something that you'd be looking for Boston to continue to work on, per se, for lack of a better phrase, or to tweak? And then obviously is if Porzingis does become cleared, would you play him in this series just to kind of get a minute so that his first return to action isn't his first trip to the NBA Finals and the pressure and the excitement that kind of comes along with that?
Yeah, I think that they'll probably go a little bit with the small lineup in game 3, depending on how Indiana comes out. What about Haliburton? I think that changes their approach if it's McConnell as a starting point guard instead of Haliburton. I think that the Celtics will go a little bit small. I think they'll give more percent minutes. I think they'll mix and match a little bit. And I also think that the good thing for the Celtic faithful is Jason Tatum. He had 36 and 12 in game 1. He has not had that premium shooting night yet. Right. And he he's due for a great game. And I'm not talking about like, he had 36 in overtime, but he had a slow fourth quarter. I'm talking about like a Jalen type of outing. I think he's due for a big night. And I think that's a good news for this series, that you haven't seen like this, first rate, top notch Jason, first team all NBA performance yet. But I think that's coming. And I think that I don't think they'll experiment as much, but I definitely think they'll match Indiana. And I think they understand they're a good road team in the playoffs. They won twice at Miami last year, even in that series. I think they won twice in Philly. In that series, they can win on the road. And I think they'll understand the environment that they're in. It's a bandbox. It's a great, perfect arena, Gainbridge Fieldhouse for the Indiana fans. It's a great environment. And I think that they'll be ready. 8:30 start, so a lot of the crowd will be, juiced up and ready to go there. And it's Indy 500 weekend here, so it's a lot of people in town, walking around. So it's a vibrant atmosphere. But I also think the Celtics will be ready for that atmosphere. And you just want to, like they did early in game 2, hold on, don't fall behind 32-10, or don't get caught up in the team. We all see it, Warren. The team that has the first home game 3 down 0-2, always comes out like raring to go, always comes out like a ball of fire. And you just got to hold on, calm down, let it get to the game itself, and then, meticulously, stay in there and then play your game. So I think the Celtics will be ready for game 3.
Well, I think it's a great place to stop here. Extensive coverage here on the first 2 games of the series, Celtics and the Indiana Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals. Western Conference Finals going strong. So we'll obviously have some conversation about that in our next show. But as always, man, I think this has been a great conversation. 2 amazing people who cover the NBA. Caitlin Cooper, again, make sure you follow her at CT_Cooper, and her works over at Basketball She Wrote. And you know what it is with my guy Gary Washburn, G Washburn Globe. Make sure you follow him. Everything he's got going on in the Boston Globe. Also, obviously, a great follow on Twitter as well too. You can follow me at Shaw Sports NBA. And for those, if you're watching us on YouTube, I want to give another big shout out or a shout out to Young World Clothing. So that is _YWRLD. They sent me this great T-shirt I'm wearing here today. So I want to give them, all the props that they have going on for their situation out there. Their garments reflect the harmony of sustainability and luxury, and I can tell you this thing is comfy. So shout outs to Young World Clothing as well. So that'll do it here for this week's edition of Believe in Celtics. We'll catch you some point here later down the series. Hopefully it won't be too much longer. And next time we'll be discussing, we'll talk about the Celtics, their road to the NBA Finals here. Catch y'all next week, y'all. Peace out.